Good afternoon, my name is Cheyenne Smeaton, and this course project is on the reduction of greenhouse gases through augmentation of feed for beef cattle. What are the dangers of greenhouse gases? Greenhouse gases can trap heat, which contributes to global warming, and it contributes to respiratory diseases due to the air pollution from poor air quality. Greenhouse gases that the beef cattle produce is methane and carbon dioxide. Cattle are the #1 agricultural source of greenhouse gas emissions worldwide. Methane is also 28 times more potent than the carbon dioxide in warming the atmosphere, which is why methane emission is more important to focus on, especially because it has such a high percentage of emissions. Eating less beef can also contribute to less protein production because if the beef cattle is the #1 protein producing source that has the highest greenhouse gases emissions, then by eating less of it means there'll be less production, which thus also includes less greenhouse gases being produced. Methane dangers is that it's able to trap heat in the atmosphere. So just like we talked about in the last slide, how greenhouse gases can trap heat, methane is a greenhouse gas, so it can trap heat in the atmosphere. It is also responsible for 30% of the current rise in global temperatures, and it affects the air quality. From beef cattle production is the #1 agricultural source of the greenhouse gas produced. One single cow can belch up to 220 belches of methane per year, and it's an unsustainable diet because the amount of production for this protein means that the greenhouse gases are going to rise, which is why additives and certain measures need to be taken, like the augmentation of feed for beef cattle. A lack of protein in the diet for beef cattle also affects the microbial protein production in the rumen. This reduces the utilization of low-protein feeds. A trial that was recently ran was that they added seaweed into the diet, and it showed a reduction of up to 60% of methane emissions by using 1% of seaweed, which is pretty crazy because no one has ever thought of seaweed before. The augmentation of feed. The definition of augmentation of feed is the manipulation of food or change in the diet for a specific cause. The high-fiber diet is easier to digest, and we need to find more ways to make cows more sustainable and less gassy. If we make them more sustainable and less gassy, that will mean that the greenhouse gas emissions from these animals will be reduced. It also will help to sustain an economically sound environment, and it can reduce the methane and CO2 emissions. Beef cattle feed augmentation. The beef cattle need to be fed on a nutrient needs. This means that the needs is sufficient in energy, sufficient in protein, sufficient in minerals, and sufficient in vitamins. All of these categories need to be adequate in order for the cattle to have sufficient feeds. The feed requirement is 8% total crude protein in the dry matter, which is 1 to 2 pounds of a 20% to 30% protein supplement, or its equivalent should be fed daily, and a mineral mix and water should always be available. This is important for the cow to have sufficient needs. How will greenhouse gases decrease? The higher feed efficiency leads to less methane gases produced. It occurs from improved digestibility. The enteric emissions are lowered with low digestible feed. Increase resource efficiency and change fermentation processes in the animals to decrease greenhouse gas emissions intensity. So feed substitutes and supplements are highly useful when decreasing the greenhouse gases. Enteric fermentation is a natural part of the digestive system where the microbes in the digestive tract decompose and ferment food. This is producing methane through waste and belching, which thus includes the total enteric emissions can be lowered by low digestible feed. Feed substitutes changes the fermentation process in the rumen and also changes the methane production. Overall, the reduction of greenhouse gases through augmentation of feed for beef cattle can be accomplished. Beef cattle are the #1 agricultural producers of greenhouse gas emissions. It's crucial to find a way that is sustainable for these beef cattle. The beef cattle will produce methane and carbon dioxide. Methane being #1, this is dangerous because the greenhouse gases can trap heat and contribute to respiratory diseases due to poor air quality. With changing the beef cattle's feed, we can reduce methane and CO2 emissions. We now know that the augmentation of the feed can change the fermentation process and amount of enteric emissions, which will allow decrease the amount of greenhouse gases produced. And lastly, this is my works cited page, and from everything that I was able to research and come up with for this presentation. Thank you.